Would you follow me? Would you believe with me? Tell me you'll be with me. Tell me you'll die with me. Come on, let me hear your war cry. Come on, get on, let me hear your war cry. Come on, get on, let me hear your war cry.
You are listening to Free Talkcast, where we talk about news and current events from a perspective of peace, love, and liberty. I'm your host, Aria, and let's get right into things. All right, perfect. I am sitting here with Mark Biltz of El Shaddai Ministries. I know I pronounced that incorrectly.
Yeah, it's Biltz. Biltz, like
Biltz. Oh, I've got it as Blitz right in front of me. No, I don't. I'm just dyslexic. I'm not actually dyslexic.
Happens all the time.
Yep, you are absolutely correct. Mark Biltz. Okay. And you're with El Shaddai Ministries.
Exactly. Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sitting down with me today. It may seem a little weird to a lot of people who aren't familiar with my larger body of work that I'm sitting down with the founder of El Shaddai Ministries, because we don't generally come at things from a religious bent, because I'm not a particularly religious person, but the subject of religion, it fascinates me endlessly, and it's a critical part of people's lives. And just because I'm not religious, the vast majority, something like 95% of people throughout the world, maybe even higher, I don't remember the number. I'm recollecting numbers that go 15 years back in my memory, are religious. And these things play important parts in people's lives. So thank you, Mark Biltz, for sitting down with me. Can you tell me a little bit about El Shaddai Ministries? And am I pronouncing that correctly?
Oh, you are absolutely pronouncing it correct. But just so you know, I think God hates religion. And I don't even consider myself religious. So I just wanted to start there to clarify.
Okay.
Language, even in English, people assume words mean different things. And so I love being out of the box. I love breaking all kinds of barriers. I love stirring the pot. But I was born a Catholic, believe it or not, for about 20 years. And then I quit Catholicism, and it really upset my parents because I had 5 older sisters. 3 of them had went to the convent. Of us 4 boys, 3 of us, including me, went to a seminary. I went to a high school seminary, left home when I was 13, all through high school. But then when I quit the Catholic Church, my dad put a gun to my head and threatened to blow my head off because he was so upset I quit the Catholic Church. And, I was thinking,
I assume you're exaggerating a little bit there?
No, absolutely not in the slightest way. I was 19 years old. And
wow.
But I was Jewish on my father's side. And so he wouldn't have cared if I left Catholicism to become Jewish. He just didn't want me to become a Protestant. Okay. So anyway, so I jumped from Catholicism I'm almost 70 years old. Next year I'll be 70. I'm an old guy. But back in the 70s, what happened was they had the charismatic movement going on. And so I jumped in the charismatic movement for about 19 years. So Catholic 19 years, charismatic 19 years. And then I left that and I started studying Judaism. And oh my goodness, I would consider myself a kind of a hybrid between Christianity and Judaism. And El Shaddai Ministries, we don't do any of the Christian things, okay? We don't do Christmas. We don't do Easter. We don't go to church on Sunday, okay? We observe all of the Jewish holidays and we keep the Shabbat. But at the same time, we believe that Yeshua is the Messiah. And so Christians believe Jesus, as they call him, but that wasn't his name. There wasn't any J's in Hebrew or Greek 2,000 years ago. There wasn't even a J in English until the 1600s. So his name is Yeshua. So I'm all about authenticity. I don't want to put out to me to be anything than what I am. But here at El Shaddai Ministries, my goal for 25 years, I started this 25 years ago, is to make a bridge between Christians and Jews so they can understand each other better. And so my goal is to make Christians get to meet Orthodox rabbis. I want Orthodox rabbis to meet Christians. And so I even have an Orthodox rabbi flying all the way from Israel to speak to my group this weekend. So I get along great with Orthodox Jews. I get along great with Christians. But we're kind of in the middle trying to help Christians open their eyes to see the roots of their faith because of so much anti-Semitism, bias. They've missed a lot of what the Bible's really about.
I absolutely agree with that. And like, correct me if I'm wrong here, but what I'm gathering based on what you just said, by believing that I'm going to pronounce it as Jesus because that's just how I've always pronounced it. So
no, that's fine.
Okay. Is you accept or you believe Jesus as the Messiah, but you don't accept all of the, I want to call them corruptions, but all of the changes that
all the pagan holidays.
Yes, that was exactly what I was going for. The kind of mess that Paul brought to Christianity as a whole. Is that correct? Maybe.
I think people misunderstand Paul. I think that's part of the problem. Believe it or not, I and a friend of mine that is an expert in Hebrew, we have just completely written the New Testament. And we have done it in Hebrew with Hebrew transliteration and the corrections that in English, because just like many people think the media is biased, we think the English translators were very anti-Semitic and biased, and they even intentionally mistranslated the Bible in some places. And so we've just come out with a Bible people can get online from our website, esm.us/Bible, but we make it available so Christians can see the correct translations from the Hebrew and Greek into the English.
Okay, and you said that website is esm.us, is that correct?
Yeah,
El Shaddai
Ministries.
Okay,
Yeah.
El Shaddai, okay. I'm pronouncing that slightly incorrectly, so.
Oh, you're doing great.
Well, thank you. So overall, Christianity, you mentioned a lot of paganism, and that's something that has always fascinated me because there's no real acknowledgement among mainstream Christians that these holidays that they regularly celebrate don't seem to have anything to do with the actual religion. Like Easter and the Easter Bunny is an obvious example. And the Christians that I've known, again, growing up in the Deep South, where there were Southern Baptists everywhere, none of them seem to recognize this inherent conflict between celebrating what is obviously a pagan holiday and their Christian religious beliefs. And the same thing is true of Christmas as well, obviously, with, I think most scholars agreeing that Jesus was probably born sometime in the spring and obviously not on the winter solstice. It's good to hear that it's not just some fringe belief out there, I suppose, of people who are trying to get down to the core of Christianity. And do you perceive any sort of hostility from mainstream Christians, I guess? Because when I'm thinking about this, I can only come at it sort of from the perspective of my religious upbringing, and I can just hear my grandmother and my grandfather just grinding their teeth at the idea of a Jew saying that Jesus is the Messiah, but a lot of what they believe is still wrong. So I'm curious what your experience is with people in that regard, especially because you are a ministry, you are attempting to spread these ideas, and I don't know, maybe to convert people to this way of viewing the world.
Well, we don't try to convert anybody. And what's amazing is our congregation is made up of about 250,000 people. Okay?
That's quite large.
When I'm speaking on the weekends, we will have up to 200 cities in 20 nations watching live. In our TV studio, we have a dozen languages that are spoken. We have Russians here, Chinese here, Hispanic people here, a dozen different languages are in the building. Now, our TV studio only holds about 150 people, but we broadcast all over the world, and we get emails and people from all over the world. And then we have every denomination. It's just not every ethnic group. We have all kinds of denominations come here because I teach things they've never heard before. And it is all based on facts. It's based on science. It's based on accurate translations of the scriptures. Now, I teach, and the Bible proves that Yeshua, Jesus, was actually born in the fall, around late September, October, on the 15th day of the Hebrew month called Tishrei.
Okay. I was mistaken then in thinking it was the spring.
Oh, it's okay. A lot of people think that.
Sure. It certainly wasn't December.
No, absolutely. I can prove that. But as far as how other Christians take me, I'm going to Tennessee in April speaking to 5,000 Christians at one time. I was in 13 nations speaking around the world in 13 months before COVID. This year, I'm going to Israel twice. I'm going to Nepal, India, and Kenya. But there are Christians all over the world that are getting it. They're understanding it, and they're leaving the paganism of Christianity, and they're coming back to the authenticity of the Bible. And so I get along great.
Yeah.
Even though our church is on Saturday, I preach on Sundays at churches all around the United States.
I do have another question about that, because you mentioned that you're Jewish, or that you are a Jewish Christian. How should I phrase that?
Yeah, well, I have relatives who died in the Holocaust that are listed in Israel in Yad Vashem on my father's side. We just call ourselves first century believers.
Okay.
I don't call myself a Christian. I don't call myself Jewish. I'm just a first century believer.
So what are the key things that sort of differentiate you from the, I don't want to say the average Christian, because Christianity obviously encompasses a large number of denominations, but I suppose what distinguishes your beliefs from those of perhaps the Methodists or the Southern Baptists, or just the Presbyterians, the Protestants in general?
Right. Well, the main thing is we keep all of the biblical holidays. We don't keep any of the pagan Christian holidays. But from a scientific point of view, which is huge, the pagan calendar we use today, which was started by the Roman pagans, and then Pope Gregory changed it, to what it is today. It's very scientific, but it's based only on the sun. The Islamic calendar is based only on the moon. The biblical calendar, God said he wanted us to use both the sun and the moon. So that is the one I use, where the moon determines the months, the sun determines the year. And with you and I right now having a conversation, you're on the East Coast, I'm on the West Coast. That's 3 hours time difference. We have to agree if we're going to meet, on what time zone. Well, Christians are off the biblical calendar completely by being on a pagan solar calendar. And we create a calendar, the biblical Jewish calendar, where we correlate the Gregorian calendar with the biblical calendar. So then people can, like a chiropractic alignment, get lined up. And so they understand when God wants to intersect this universe and meet with him.
Now, you mentioned during that your church celebrates the biblical holidays, but not the pagan ones. I assume when you say that, you mean things like Passover and things of that. That's the only religious holiday the only biblical holiday that I can think of. I assume there are others, but is that more or less what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, there are several, but here's the thing. Easter is supposed to be the resurrection when Jesus rose from the dead. But Christians, because they're on the wrong calendar, will celebrate the resurrection a month before he died. Now, how do you do that unless you're on the wrong calendar? So Passover sometimes is a month after Easter. And it's because the Christians are on the wrong calendar. If they were on the right calendar, they would always celebrate it at the correct time. But yes, there's Passover. There's also what's called Pentecost. Of course, Baptists aren't Pentecostals, or Shabbat. But then there's the fall feast. There's the Feast of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah. There's the Feast of Yom Kippur. And then the Feast of Tabernacles, a 7-day feast.
I have to ask, and I don't want this question to sound like antagonistic or anything, but would God really care if people are celebrating the resurrection a month late or a month early?
Well, it depends.
Okay.
Would you like, if you're married, do you want to celebrate your anniversary a month later or a month earlier? Or how about if people started keeping your birthday on the Muslim calendar, or they started keeping it on a different calendar? It's not about religion at all.
Okay.
It's about relationship. And so if you want to have a relationship with somebody, then if you want to go on a walk with somebody, you both have to agree where you're going to walk, what time you're going to start, where you're going to walk. And so it all comes into, if you really want a relationship, then you need to pay attention to the calendar.
Okay, that explanation makes a great deal of sense. So it isn't necessarily that God would be upset, so to speak, that people are doing it at the wrong time, but it's just, it puts them out of sync with
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay. That makes a great deal of sense. I have never heard about it in that particular perspective. Now, obviously, I'm aware of, to some extent, I'm not a historian or a religious scholar, but I'm aware to some extent of the history of the Gregorian calendar and how all of that sort of developed in broad, generalized strokes. So I'm not an expert on these subjects, but it always has bothered me that, for example, October is the 10th month. And not the 8th.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. Yeah, that happened because the Romans, when they came up with this calendar, thought there were only 10 months in the year. And then several hundred years later, they decided, oh, there's really 12 months. So then they added 2 months. But at 1st January was at the end of the year, not the beginning of the year. I mean, everything was screwed up. So they knew they had to add 2 months. So by adding the 2 months, that's how all the names got messed up. But yes, for about, well, I think it was about 60 years, a year was based on 10 months.
It's a very messy calendar. It reminds me a lot of what people say about the English language, that is, 10 languages in a trench coat pretending to be a single language. And the Gregorian calendar is kind of like that as well. It's 10 different calendars sort of mashed together to make something that kind of sort of works. Sometimes like leap year, for example, everyone just thinks it's every 4 years, but it's actually every 4 years unless it's divisible by 400, maybe?
100, yeah, something like that.
It gets bizarre.
Well, the solar calendar, they have to add a leap day. But on the biblical calendar, you add a leap month. 7 times in 19 years, they have an extra month added to the calendar.
Okay, I'm going to have to, now that would be a little bit more complicated than you would be able to explain to me as we're sitting here talking about. I'm going to have to look into this calendar aspect.
It's not that complicated, because have you ever heard of the term a blue moon?
Yeah, I have.
A blue moon is 2 full moons in 1 month.
Okay.
All right, well, because the biblical calendar for the month is based on the moon, that could never happen on the biblical calendar. When that extra moon is, they just throw in an extra month. So there's only 1 full moon every month. So the month there would be 13, they'd have a 13th month, but on the Gregorian calendar, they'll have 2 full moons in 1 month.
Okay, yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question, is this would mean that sometimes, obviously, some years have more months than other years.
Exactly.
Because
7 times in 19 years, there'll be a 1 month added.
Okay. I like it. So are there still 7 days per week in this calendar?
Always.
Or is it, okay.
Always. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And the
See,
Sabbath...
what's interesting, the month is based on the cycle of the moon. The year is based on the cycle of the sun, but the week is not based on anything natural. It's supernatural. I mean, some countries tried to have a 10-day week. It just wouldn't work.
Okay. That's a complicated subject, and it's one that people can talk about endlessly, because there are so many different calendars that people use here on the, yeah.
Exactly. Hundreds of calendars. All these different nations have different calendars. But it goes back again. If you want to communicate with somebody, you got to get on their calendar. And I consider the creator of the universe as my boss. I'm not his boss. I don't stick him in my pocket and pull him out when I need him, okay, or put him on the shelf. But I have to do if I want to meet with him, then I have to be on his calendar.
I'm curious a little bit more about some of the actual beliefs, because Christians, as I know them, they basically throw out almost all of the Jewish traditions that I'm aware of, such as the dietary restrictions and the clothing restrictions and things like that. Does your ministry adhere to those traditions? Because I know, speaking of Paul previously, I know there was a lot of conflict in the early days of Christianity, where Paul was arguing that these traditions did not need to be kept, but some of the apostles, like Peter, were saying, well, they did need to be kept, and they were always intended to be kept. So where does and I don't want to call it a religion because you don't want to.
No, that's fine.
Where does your spirituality fall in that category?
Okay, a lot of Christians totally misinterpret the Bible. So the problem isn't in the writing, it's in the interpretation of the writing. Now, when you go to the Torah, there are actually not 10 commandments, but 613. Okay.
Right.
And of those 613, some are only for if you live in the land of Israel. So they wouldn't apply to me. Some of them are temple related. There's no temple. They don't apply to me. Some are for farmers. Some of the laws are for judges. Some of the laws are for women. Some of the laws are for men. So there's no way I can do the 613 laws. As a matter of fact, I'm going against the law by trying to do some of the laws because they weren't meant for me. So between Christians and Jews, you have to understand who is it talking to? Where is it talking about? All right, to decide, does this apply to me? Now, what I say is I don't do all the commandments, but I keep all the commandments. And the word keep means to guard, to protect. And I don't want people discarding them, throwing them away. And I don't think any human has the right to edit what God wrote. And so I don't tell people, I don't go around telling people you have to believe this way, you have to believe that way. I put everything out like a smorgasbord and say, take what you want, leave what you don't want, keep coming, and pretty soon you'll like some and you won't like some, but that's fine. I don't want anyone to conform to me. I don't think that I am a know-it-all. I don't know it all. I make a lot of errors, a lot of mistakes, but I have fun. I just really enjoy what I'm doing, and I want people to have fun, for heaven's sake. I mean, so many Christians are so down in the dumps, guilty, and they have a horrible relationship with God. But God wants to party. Believe it or not, the Creator wants to have fun. That's what these so-called religious observances are about. It's nothing to do with guilt. It has to do with partying with the Creator. Who would want to do that?
I absolutely love that take because it was a few years ago that I noticed that as people portray the Christian God, he has no sense of humor whatsoever, no joy. Exactly. And I just have such a hard time believing, like, I have seen the way rabbits eat carrots. This was what I said on Twitter or whatever. I was like, you cannot watch a rabbit eat a carrot and tell me that the creator of the universe doesn't have a sense of humor, because it's just adorable and funny looking. It's cute, right?
Yeah. Oh, you are so you're closer to the Creator than most Christians. I'm telling you what. This is so true. And I am not one of these hellfire brimstone preachers. That's one of the stupidest thing there is. Actually, it says the wrath of God isn't what brings people to Him. It's the love. Now, a lot of people haven't had good fathers. You know, mine was an alcoholic, bless his soul. Okay, and he had problems. But many people portray God as how they were raised almost, their father, which may have been a horrible father. Some were good fathers. But God, it's God's love and mercy that brings people to change. It's not, because think about this. Too many Christians serve God for fire insurance, or he's got the best life plan there is. They serve God from total selfishness. They don't even care about how God feels. Oh, wow, I don't want to sin against God, because if I sin against God, then something horrible is going to happen to me. It should be, I don't want to sin against God because I don't want to break his heart. In any relationship, if you care about the person, you don't want to do things that hurt the relationship. But that's the problem. People, they're more worried about their consequence of their sin than the sin itself. They're saying, God, don't save me from my sin. I love it too much. Just save me from the consequence of my sin. But that's not how it works. God wants to save you from the sin itself. Then you don't have to worry about the consequence.
I love that take, because one of my primary concerns with what I see of many Christians in America is that they are, as you mentioned, they are motivated primarily by fear, a fear of death. And it's the fact that they want to live forever, or that they fear eternal damnation, or they just fear having the experiences of Job, perhaps, and their entire world taken from them as a result of sin. It's not because they want to do good. It's not because they love what is actually being said, or because they experience joy as a result of it. It's because they fear the consequences of not doing so. And that's not a good way to live in my experience. I want to do the things I want to do. I don't want to do them simply because I'm scared of what result may come about if I don't do them.
Oh, you are so right on. I think you're theologically a lot closer than most people, but it's about a relationship. Oh my gosh, a relationship is supposed to be fun. You're supposed to have joy. And so for me, I would hate to have a relationship with the Creator or anyone if they just walk around depressed all the time.
Excellent
or mad all the time.
I remember when I was in Sunday school as I wasn't a child then, I guess I was probably a preteen, but one of the instructors or teachers or whatever said something to the effect of, if you want God to listen to you, then you have to ask things in a certain way. He made the allegation that you can't say, yo, God, hook me up with this or whatever in some modern slang. And that bothered me in so many ways. Like he's acting like God is this command prompt on a computer and you have to type the command exactly the right way. And then this God that they believe in has no mirth and no joy, no laughter.
Right.
I don't understand. They do see the God, as you mentioned, as similar to their father, very stern, very always glowering. What is the word I'm looking for? Always glaring, never happy, never smiling. And I have to believe in a God that laughs because
absolutely
the universe is filled with laughter. My life is filled with laughter. If it makes me laugh, then I enjoy it.
I love it.
And I just don't see a lot of that from most Christians. I feel like they have lost sight of the humor, I don't know if the Bible points to a God that is mirthful or not, but existence itself, to me, it's about being happy, enjoying enjoying the company of others and experiencing laughter. Yep. And I don't see much of that from people of any religion.
Yeah, that's a sad thing because all through the Bible, it talks about God laughing. It really does. As a matter of fact, let me tell you this. This is why you don't see things in English. You only see it in the Hebrew. But you're probably familiar with the story of Abraham and Isaac. Are you familiar with Abraham and Isaac? He's the guy that was going to kill his son Isaac. And his wife Sarah was all upset. They're kind of the foundational Old Testament story.
Right.
Well, it says that God goes to Abraham, who's 100 years old, and his wife, Sarah, who is 90 years old, and tells them they're going to have a baby. And they both in the Bible crack up laughing. They're just laughing and laughing, saying, yeah, right, I'm 100, she's 90, and we're both going to have a baby. You're crazy, God. Well, they ended up naming their son Isaac, which means laughter. Okay, so his name is actually laughter. And what's funny, in Hebrew, the word for laughter is made up of these 3 Hebrew letters, but in Hebrew, every letter is also a number. Like algebra, they would take numbers and put letters in for them, Well, the letters that make up Isaac's name have like Roman numerals. A V is 5 and X is 10, that kind of thing. Well, the letters that spell Isaac's name in Hebrew have the numeric value of 100 and also 90, the very age of Abraham and Sarah when they had. So God is filled with laughter and humor, telling them to name him after a 100-year-old and a 90-year-old are having a baby, which means laughter.
That's good to hear. I don't know if I'm convinced at this point because my impression, you mentioned that the Bible is filled with God laughing. My impression is that is not the impression that I got from it. I always think of the story of Elijah, or maybe it was Elisha, I don't remember which, but he went to a city and some children made fun of his bald head. And the response to that...
and a bear came and got him.
Which is like, wow, there's no sense of humor in that whatsoever. It's like, how dare you children laugh and enjoy... Like, granted, they were being mean and mocking someone, but it seemed a little disproportionate. But I wasn't familiar with any parts of the Bible in which God was laughing. And I never really thought about the story of Abraham and Isaac in that context. But I don't know the history of the name or how it translates into English or the original Hebrew. So I would never have known any of that anyway. But can you give me any other examples as from the Bible of God being humorous?
Well, yeah, there are several verses in Psalms where God sits in the heaven and he laughs and he laughs. That's what it says. I can't at the moment, but yes, there are verses in the Bible that literally says he's laughing.
That is excellent. I hope that the majority of Christians out there who are not aware of that as of now end up becoming aware of that at some point in the future, because I feel like, especially now with everyone, I say especially now, but things are always like this. People are always stressed out about their jobs. They're always stressed out about politics. People are always worried about something, and we can always use a little more laughter in the world. And religion is a very somber and serious subject for a lot of people. It shouldn't
be, though. I know, that's horrible. Like I said, though, God hates religion.
Right. And presumably it would be one of the reasons for that would be that there's no joy. When I go to a Southern Baptist church, and I haven't been to one in a very long time, I don't see, even when they stand up to sing the hymns, I don't see any joy or any happiness about being there. And you mentioned being a Catholic. I've only been to one Catholic service in my entire life, but my experience was that it was very much a formal affair.
Yes.
No one was really there to have fun or to enjoy the experience of being there to worship, I suppose.
Yeah. They just want to fulfill their duty.
Yeah.
Their obligation.
And I don't know that, like, if I'm not the creator of the universe, obviously, but I wouldn't want people respecting my teachings, I guess, simply because they felt obligated to.
Exactly. You know what? Again, English is horrible. When you think of a king, this is the authoritarian, and it's you better do or off with your head. But in Hebrew, the word is melech, and melech means a king who only accepts volunteers. He will not force anyone into his kingdom. Only those who want him to reign as king will he allow in his kingdom. He doesn't, that's the kind of king he is. He even humbles himself and asks people, what have I done that you don't want to serve me? I mean, I've taken care of you. I give you rain. I give you food. I give you heat. I give you all these things. And all you do is stab me in the back, basically. You only want me because I'm your sugar daddy. Okay. You only come to me because of what you want, not because you want to obey me.
I love that take because, like I said, I used to do a show with a Muslim that was called Call to Freedom, and he would frequently cite one of the teachings in the Quran that was, there is no compulsion in religion. And of course, our evangelical Christian that was on the show would make the same sort of point, especially in regard to judging other people who don't believe in exactly the way that you believe or who just aren't Christian. They would point out that these teachings that we're accusing people of breaking or violating, they only apply if that person willfully submits to them, right? If that person voluntarily says, this is what I believe, and these are the laws that I'm going to follow because I believe that God has handed down these laws, well, that person obeying those laws is a pretty big deal. But that doesn't give them any license to look at someone else who has not volunteered to be subservient to that king, to say, well, how dare you do this? You're not allowed to do that.
Right. Well, along that same line, part of the problem is there are some laws that you can try to obey, like gravity. That doesn't work. Right. If you think you can fly and jump off a 100-story building, that law, I'm sorry, is not going to work. Okay. But there are other, I don't even like the word law. And that's really is mistranslated. The word law really is mistranslated. For example, I think of the Bible as the operation manual of your car. If you want your car to operate, you need to follow these instructions. The word isn't law, it's really instruction. That's been mistranslated as law. So okay. I want you to think of the Bible as God's instruction manual. And it's like in the manual, whatever you do not stick your hand in the blender when it's running. Okay. And then people stick their hand in the blender when it's running, and then they blame God. God said, I tried to tell you, don't stick your hand in it. If your car's going to break down, if you don't put oil in it, all of God's rules are like that. It's here's how you will have the most successful life. If you do this and this and this and this, man, your engine's going to run forever. If you do this and this and this, you are destroying your engine. And that is really how the Bible is. It's our choice. He gives us a free will. You don't have to follow me. You can do whatever you want. You have a limited time, 60, 70, 80 years. But this is what will make your life be all in tune, like you need a tune-up. These are the things you do. If you don't want to, that's up to you. You can lose your life early.
And it makes sense in that context. I mean, sure, you can put windshield wiper fluid in your radiator if you want, but
exactly, he gives you the free will.
Right. It is a terrible idea. And like, look, anyone out there listening, do not put windshield wiper in your radiator. It will cause your engine to seize up. It'd be a terrible idea. I like that way of viewing things versus, like, if that's the case, right? If we should follow these instructions because doing so allows us to lead better, richer, fuller, healthier lives or whatever,
right?
Then the punishment is not having the fuller, richer life. Whereas a lot of people view...
Or breaking down, or you break down,
yes,
like your radiator.
Whereas a lot of people would view it as, okay, well, you broke this law, so you must be punished, right? Like you ate pork, so we have to punish you in whatever way would seemingly be appropriate. I don't know, grounding the child or whatever because they broke God's law. Who knows, right? That's a terrible example. But the point is, they feel that there should be some extraneous, or not, that's not the word I'm looking for, some extra punishment in addition to just the consequence that is innate to violating that law, like the car breaking down. They should also wag their finger at you and say, no, that's bad. You shouldn't do that. And I like that idea that you put forward significantly better, because to tell someone you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that is sort of a position of arrogance and control.
Absolutely. A lot of people, a lot of pastors, a lot of religious leaders are in it for power.
Right, yeah.
Control. That's really what they're in it for, power and control. You want to manipulate people. The sad thing that I have with much of Christianity is they like to judge between what is right and what is wrong, and some things that God thinks is horrible, they'll let it slide. But other things that are down on the list, they'll make that the forefront. Whatever their particular church or denomination is, they all have their pet horrible sin, not realizing some of the things they do are a lot worse.
Do you mind giving me an example of some of those things?
Well, absolutely. Okay. A lot of Christians will really get mad at someone who claims to be a homosexual. Okay.
Sure.
And they'll point the finger and they'll wag their tongue. Okay. But do you know in Proverbs chapter 6, it says there's 6 things the Lord hates and 7 are an abomination, and homosexuality isn't even the top 10. The number 1 is a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, those that sow discord. Well, what do you see within the church? You see a lot of people with proud looks, a lot of people with lying tongues, a lot of people that sow discord among the brethren, and those are all called abominations. And yet they will pick and choose which abomination they favor over another abomination. And this abomination is okay, but that abomination is not okay.
Now, what is meant by proud looks? You mentioned that was
someone who is arrogant,
okay,
someone who thinks they're better than everyone else. You know, they look down upon the poor, or they look down upon the homeless, or they look down upon anybody. And I judge absolutely nobody because I'm not anybody's judge. My goal is to get people to fall in love with their dad, the real dad, the creator. And those who have run away, I want them to go back home.
And I love that perspective of it, because you mentioned that you're not the judge, but a lot of the religious people that I've encountered throughout my life, and this is not true of all Christians or all people of any religion, but a lot of them are very judgmental. And we see this a lot today. Obviously, like I'm a trans person, and this is a big issue with a lot of them now, more so than ever. And like, even if they believe everything that they're saying that they believe, it doesn't impact them whatsoever, and it certainly doesn't fulfill any of the teachings that they're supposed to live their lives by treating people so disrespectfully and with such anger and animosity, right? The instruction was to love your neighbor as yourself, not unless they were a man wearing a dress, right? And I feel like a lot of that gets lost, in addition to just not having the sense of humor that is so important to me and that I think should be so critical to people's lives. They don't allow themselves to laugh because they're too busy judging the actions of other people and worrying about the actions of those people, and not just existing in the moment and loving themselves and one another. And that's heartbreaking because it is so much easier to love one another and to hope for the best for one another than it is to say, oh, that person, he didn't get the right paperwork when he came to the United States. He's a terrible person. And it's so much easier to say, hey, I love you, brother. But they struggle with that.
How can I help?
Right. So I'm glad to hear that there is a take on Christianity, I suppose. Now, I keep calling you a Christian, and like you have specifically said that that's not accurate. But in the early days of Christianity, if I remember correctly, they did simply refer to themselves as Jews as well. Like the word Christian didn't exist.
Exactly.
So when you say that you're a Jew, it is because you abide the teachings of the Torah, presumably, and you recognize that Jesus is the Messiah. And that
Okay, well, there's a difference between Jewish genealogy and Jewish beliefs.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot
Right.
of present-day Jews that don't follow Judaism at all. They're more communists, atheists. Okay, so you have to separate between the people and the belief. Now, physically, I'm Jewish on my father's side, but as far as a belief goes, it's a homogenized blend of Judaism and Christianity, where I do believe that Yeshua is the Messiah, but he's Jewish.
Okay. So how much of no that's a loaded question. I was going to ask how much of your
You can ask me any loaded question.
it's an impossible to answer question. I was going to ask how much of your religious beliefs would you say are typical of Christianity and how much would be typical of Judaism? But like that, what do I expect you to say? 30% Judaism, 70% Christianity, or some nonsense like that? I'm just fascinated by my understanding of Judaism is that it accepts that Jesus may have been a prophet, but not the Son of God, not the Messiah. Whereas you are coming along and saying that you do believe that Jesus is the Messiah. So it's a branch or denomination of Judaism that I'm not familiar with. But do you consider yourself to be a denomination of Judaism?
Well, there is, let me put it this way. There is a denomination, a sect of Judaism called Messianic Judaism. These are for Jewish native people who now believe that Jesus is their Messiah. Okay? They don't consider me Jewish because I'm not Jewish on my mother's side. I'm Jewish on my father's side. But they used to be the father's side, but then they changed it to the mother's side, okay, for different reasons I won't get into right now. But for me, I call myself biblical. That's what I say. I'm not really Jewish or Christian. I'm biblical, and I follow the biblical holidays that the Jews follow. I don't follow all of their traditions, I don't know if you knew this, but in Judaism, there's denominations. There's the Reformed, there's Conservative, there's Orthodox, there's Ultra-Orthodox, and they completely disagree with each other, as much as you get a Baptist and a Pentecostal. And so when you talk about Jewish belief, I even have to break it down into which denomination of Judaism.
Okay, that's a really excellent point. And I suppose it's always worth pointing out when I say Judaism, whether I mean ethnically or religiously. And I suppose my question would have been, religiously, would you consider yourself religiously to be a denomination of Judaism? Because your ethnicity, that's a fascinating topic, and it informs a person's behavior and traditions and social networks and everything else, but it doesn't necessarily define their views on the world as a whole. So I guess my question was, religiously, I guess in the overall scheme of things, yes, Christianity itself is a denomination of Judaism. How could it not be? But so I guess my question is really just kind of irrelevant because, as I just said, Christianity itself is, by definition, a denomination of Judaism. And where you fall on that is just a label that ultimately is meaningless, I guess. Some people are Baptists, some are Methodists, and those labels are very significant to them. And I'm not going to say that, obviously those labels distinguish them from other denominations of that but it doesn't really tell you much about who they are and what they believe
Right.
and what they want to see in the world.
I love that. I love that. Now, I'm going to ask you a trick question here.
Awesome.
And okay, do you have a soul?
Okay. Do I have a part of me that lives beyond my physical form, I guess?
Okay.
Is that the question?
Well, here's the thing is,
I guess my question is, what do you mean by soul?
well, first off, you don't have a soul. You are a soul who has a body.
Okay.
See, we always think of the flesh. I'm a human being and I have a soul. No, no, no. You are a soul. You just happen to have a body and you're going to get a new one later on. And so when people say the problem with self-identity, let's say they're a plumber and then all of a sudden they retire and now they go, who am I? I'm not a plumber, but they've always identified themselves as a plumber. Okay, but all of a sudden now he's not a plumber. He loses his identity. He never was a plumber. He was a soul who did plumbing. And so we have to separate who we are from what we do. Even if you're a teacher, but you're no longer a teacher, that doesn't mean your identity's gone.
Okay.
Even parents, when the kids move out of the house, they go, who am I now? I don't have any kids in the house, and they end up getting separated or whatever. Too many people try to find identity by what they do. It's not what you do. You're not a human doing. You're a human being, and you are a soul, and you have a body.
I like that perspective. I don't know that I agree because I don't know that I believe any part of me exists independently of my body, but that's my own personal belief, and I'm just unconvinced on the subject. But regardless, if human beings and souls are both things that exist, I suppose is how I would want to phrase that, then I like the idea that you are a soul that happens to have a body a lot more than I like the idea that you're a body that happens to have a soul.
Right. Exactly.
So I really like that phrasing of it. And I really like the idea of like God having a sense of humor. That to me is one of the most important parts of anyone's worldview. If the creator of your universe isn't laughing, then how can you find joy if the person that created the entire universe isn't? And that always scares me. And I feel like it leads to a lot of hardship in the world that isn't necessary. If everyone would just chill out and relax and laugh a little bit, I think the world might be a better place.
Yeah. In one sense, I've almost died so many times I've lost count. I've had guns at my head several times. I was almost eaten by lions in Africa. I've had major medical malpractice, major car accidents, armed robberies. And I really believe if it's not my time, it's not going to happen. And if it is my time, there's nothing I can do about it. So I have no fear of death. I see death more or less as changing clothes or changing bodies. I'm going to keep going. And so for me, I have a really unique relationship with God or the creator. I don't even like the word God, but it's very personal. It's not religious at all. It's personal. He saved me so many times. I can't help but like him.
Which is a beautiful sentiment. And I wish that more people would agree with that view of things and would view the creator or God, as you will, as someone that they want to be friends with, right? The God that these people worship is not the kind of person that they would want to go have a drink with at a bar. And that to me is weird when in their worldview, they want to spend all of eternity with this person, but it's also not the kind of person that they would choose to spend any time with whatsoever. And I don't know how they manage to reconcile all of those things. Like the God that I want to worship is someone that, I'd go and have a drink with, right? We'd have some laughs, have some fun. That's what I would like to believe in.
I understand. Yeah, I think here's the thing, and I don't know in your family, everyone's family is different. Some people, has there ever been anyone that you really respected?
In my family?
Or anyone in
absolutely.
the world?
Absolutely then.
Okay, now, with that being the situation, there's things you wouldn't do that you would do with Joe Friend just because you respect the relationship. Well, it's the same thing with God. We can have good times, we can have fun times, but we also have to realize and have great respect. But you can have a lot of fun and have great respect.
Sure. It's definitely worth pointing that out. Like this person that we're talking about is the creator of the universe, right? And that it's like being friends with your boss, I suppose. And
yeah, exactly. Because I worked for a couple. He was the boss of the salesman and she was his secretary. And oftentimes he would tell her, hey, get some coffee for the salesman. She'd go get it yourself. Okay. But she's supposed to be under him. And so we have to understand in every relationship, there are borders, there are boundaries there that you have to respect. And so we never want to lose that respect.
Excellently put. And your website, of course, is esm.us, and that's El Shaddai Ministries.us, essentially.
Yep.
And that's where people can go to learn more. You mentioned previously that your services you said they're not on Sundays, and you may have said it, but I'm assuming they're on Saturdays instead because that's when the Sabbath actually is. Is that correct?
Yes, but we archive all the messages. People can watch all the messages 24/7. It doesn't matter. They can always look at past messages for several years.
All right, fantastic. And that's all at esm.us?
That's it.
Fantastic.
Is it. We'd love to have your audience come and tune in. Let's see, I'm a crazy guy.
I definitely would recommend they do so. Anyone who's spreading the message that God is love and that God laughs is someone that I want everyone else to be listening to. Whether that God exists or not, to me, is irrelevant. If they believe that God exists and that God laughs and that God is love, then maybe they'll put forward those things into the universe rather than putting out their hostility and animosity and hatred and division. And I would love there to be more laughter and more love just on earth in general. So
life's too short.
It is. Mark Biltz, thank you so much for sitting down with me. Thank you. I'm grateful that you're out there. I mean, especially explaining to people that God laughs. I think that's a critically important thing for people to learn.